again on Principles of Spiritualism. And while I like to speak extemporaneously when we're at the church, I'm going to read today. I have a lot to cover, and I will get quite emotional as we go through it. So, excuse me, it's rather personal stuff, so I will read it to you and just bear with me. This is the communion of spirits as ministering angels. Now, during the London Blitz back in 1940 and 41, as the Nazi bombers continued to bomb London every night, a song became popular in the Royal Air Force among the fighter pilots, most of whom had a life expectancy of about 2 weeks. And the song was, "We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when." And it was beautifully sung by Vera Lynn, who died just this June 19th, 2020. She was 103. This meeting, again, is what we are going to talk about today. For those of you who have heard my prior presentations on the principles of spiritualism, you're familiar with how I examine each principle in the light of how it is seen by worldwide spiritualism. But for those of you who are new, you might want to listen to those other addresses, each of which treats on a single principle, June 14th, June 28th, and August 16th, which are available on our Celebrate Life YouTube channel. Today, we're going to talk about communion of spirits as ministering angels and the fifth principle of the National Spiritual Association of Churches here in America, and the third principle of the Spiritualist Union in the SNU and in the United Kingdom and the British Commonwealth, which also appears in the second and fourth principles of the International Spiritualist Federation. In the United Kingdom, the Spiritualist National Union, third principle is stated, "We recognize the communion of spirits and the ministry of angels." Further, the SNU definition of angels is, as spiritualists, our definition of angels is a spiritually evolved intelligence, either incarnate or discarnate, which aids the soul of another, which allows that the angel may be a discarnate relative. And of course, here the qualifying element is that they are spiritually evolved intelligence, and not all discarnate relatives qualify there. In America, the NSAC in its fifth principle states, "We affirm that communion with the so-called dead is a fact, scientifically proven by the phenomena of spiritualism." And in the International Spiritualist Federation, in their principles 2 and 4, they say, 2, "We recognize the existence of a spiritual link between all forms of life, and we recognize the communication between individual human spirits and different levels of life." Now, when I work as a medium and I bring a spirit through for a sitter, who is it that we're actually communicating with? Are we hearing from our departed loved ones, or angels, or our higher power, or God? Or am I just pretty good at imagining and reading the sitter's mind through ESP? Our scientific world wants to know what's really going on here. And I personally am quite involved in that endeavor. Honestly, I believe, after all my personal experience as a medium over the last 15 years, and my research and training at Maurice Pratt Institute and at Lauderdale, and 5 weeks of long courses at Arthur Findlay College in Stansted, England, that I'm actually communicating with the surviving consciousness, the spirit or the soul of that departed loved one, which is who the spirit communicates to me that they actually are. And further, that these spirits move on to become our guides as guardian angels. As an illustration, I personally know it is definitely Helen, my mother-in-law, who enables these spirits to talk to me by her being the medium on the other side of the veil. And whenever I myself go to a medium who has never met me and does not know me, they shortly ask me, "Is that woman over your left shoulder named Helen?" Or, as happened several years ago when James Bay gave me a reading at the mediumship circle, that he said, "I have a woman here whom I thought might be your Helen, but she told me her name is Dorothy." But as always, like that, I started to laugh because Helen was sneaking up on James this time. She knew that he knew my story and her first name, but he had no idea that Helen's middle name was Dorothy. But she's always like that, having fun and games played across the veil, and James was not reading my mind. So to that question, are these spirits still alive? My answer is yes, definitely. alive with all their attributes and their personality, including mirth. Scientifically, the answer that they're still alive and communicating with us is the most elegant solution. And to a physicist, elegant means the least complicated and most straightforward. You may have heard of Occam's razor, or the principle that of two explanations that account for all the facts, the simpler one is more likely to be correct. And this is what physicists mean by elegant. But on a deeper level than science, I know that spirit communications are the surviving consciousness of the departed. On my first visit to Arthur Finney College back in December of 2014, I had an experience which proves unequivocally that consciousness survives physical death. It was an experience with simply, no other explanation. Here is the narrative of that earth-shattering event. Having arrived on Sunday afternoon, November the 30th, this was the following Wednesday night on December 3rd, and I was moved to attend the Spiritualist service in the college chapel that evening. There were over 120 people attending from the school and the surrounding communities. And I chose to sit near the back, as this was my first British Spiritualist service, and I was unsure of what to expect. On the platform, the demonstrating medium was bringing through messages received from discarnate souls in the afterlife, and thus demonstrating the reality of consciousness survival. And Reverend Simone Key, the demonstrating medium, was also at the time chief instructor at the college, but not one of the instructors on the course which I was taking, so she didn't know me. And we'd never met, although in later years I would take advanced classes with Simone. Reverend Key proceeded to deliver very evidential readings for first one and then another person in the audience, each of whom could claim all the evidence given by the particular spirit communicating coming through. But then she began to deliver a communication from the third and final spirit communicator of the evening by saying, I have a woman here in spirit, and she's showing herself as having been in a wheelchair. And she died in her late 50s or 60s of a disease much worse than multiple sclerosis. And she has specific message for someone in the room. She was an educated woman who you helped through her illness at a time when the rest of her friends abandoned her. You weren't family, you were just a friend. Can anyone take those details? Oh my God, I could take all those evidential details. But sitting near the back of the auditorium and being a stranger visiting from America, I never attended a British demonstration of mediumship, and also I was not used to this indirect method of identifying the spirit and then finding who they belong to. In America, the medium usually picks a member of the audience and then looks for a departed loved one, known as the direct method. So this way of letting spirit pick the sitter was entirely new to me. But beyond that, I was shocked by the fact that I could indeed accept all those details with regard to a recently deceased friend, Barbara Levine. But before I could raise my hand to indicate I was the one who could take all those facts, two women in the audience near the front quickly raised their hands. They were regular attendees who simply hoped to qualify for the message. As a more experienced medium, I now call those selfishly motivated sitters body snatchers, because they are more interested in telling their friends, I got a message, than they are in the truths of spirit communication. But not wanting to be a body snatcher myself, I demurred. However, the medium now had to decide who the message was actually for, and apparently she was used to this crowd. So she began to question each of the women trying to claim the communication, and quickly it was revealed that each was only able to accept part of the details. The medium asked each of them, how old was your friend when they died, and what disease did she have? One lady said 80 years old and she had Parkinson's. And the other said, well, 90 years old and she also had Parkinson's. The medium then firmly stated, no, it cannot be for either of you. This discarnate communicator is very definite that she died in her late 50s or 60s and had a disease worse than multiple sclerosis, and Parkinson's simply does not qualify. And also, both of those women were too old. She was almost shaking her finger at him. I will ask the spirit communicator for some additional details. The medium was silent for a few moments, and then she said, this woman is now telling me that you had to physically modify her house to allow for her disease, and also that she was an educated woman. And as her disease slowly progressed, all her intellectual friends abandoned her because her condition was too much for them to take. But you, just a casual, friendly neighbor, still came and took her to events or the museum every week, and even continued to do that after the wheelchair fell one time. And as an educated woman, she so appreciated your intellectual discussions. Now I was almost completely overcome emotionally. I teared up as I realized that I could accept all the additional details as well, and I knew undeniably that it was Barbara, who was a Jewish friend that I would never have expected to hear from at a spiritualist service. Yet she was definitely seeking me through this medium. Choked up and unable to speak, I shakily raised my hand. And Barbara had been a fellow San Franciscan. In the years before her death, I had even brought my family and celebrated Jewish Hanukkah's first candle at her home, and also had eaten Seder meals on the first night of Passover with her family. And Barbara had a master's degree in education and had passed on 3 years earlier in September 2011 due to ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. And I had known her and her husband, Bob, for 2 or 3 years before the onset of the disease, which slowly destroyed her physically over a very short 3.5 years. And I had witnessed the remodel of her house to suit her advancing ALS. And my wife, Gail, had also taken her somewhere in the van, at least every other week while I was at work. So Barbara was obviously also sending a message through me to Gail, and not just to me. But now the medium, in order to make sure I was the right receiver, questioned me. How old was she when she died? And what was her disease? So with a wavering voice and choking back my tears, I croaked out, I believe she was in her 50s or early 60s, and she had ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. Checking later, I now know that Barbara was 68. I am not familiar with that disease. It's worse than MS. Is it worse than MS? Asked the medium. And now several people in the audience quickly replied, ALS is what we call motor neuron syndrome, the British name for it. And yes, it's much worse than MS. But the medium now interjected, never mind, the spirit communicator herself is now excitingly telling me, yes, it is a man, and that's the man. So having now successfully placed the message with me, the medium said, the communicator wants to thank you specifically for telling her that she wouldn't be dead when she passed on, because that knowledge saved her so much time in the new life. She said that she is already assisting new arrivals in their adjustment to the same facts and to help them awake to their new lives here. The medium went on. She also says, and with much emotion, that when she could no longer even hand you a cookie, still, you came in order to tell her the message that she would still be alive. She says she loves you, and thank you again for the courage to give her that message before she died. The evidence about the cookies within the message was phenomenal. How could the medium have possibly imagined that cookies, which sat on the kitchen counter between me and Barbara, completely immobilized and braced in her wheelchair, nearly 4 years earlier in March of 2011, on the evening of Barbara's birthday, which was when I found the courage to poke my nose in and tell her that I knew she wouldn't be dead after her impending death. There's simply no way the medium could know these details about the disease in which the medium was unfamiliar, or that Barbara's body, including her head, was strapped to a wheelchair and could not move at all to hand me a cookie that same evening as we sat in the kitchen with the cookies between us. When I told her this important message, and further, in the United Kingdom, they call them biscuits and not cookies. But Reverend Key clearly said cookies. For this event, for me, this event will always remain undeniable proof that Barbara was still alive and telling these details to the medium. Also, Barbara's spirit reaction in real time as the medium identified me, and Barbara said to the medium, "Yes, it is a man, and that is the man," is experiential scientific proof, replicating other experiences I've had as a medium, delivering messages to other people. Further, the message itself overwhelmed me entirely because every single fact was perfectly accurate and could not have been known or guessed by the medium or anyone there. And the statistical odds of the medium simply guessing all that correctly is beyond astronomical. But Barbara had definitely said that she was now ministering to new arrivals. So it's not an angel, but a surviving consciousness of individuals who become angels and do the work in the next life. Now, you must have noticed that my title for this address differs slightly from the SNU statement for this principle. And this is because I'm quoting what Emma Hardinge Britten actually said on May the 3rd, 1871, when she gave us this principle received from Spirit, which was, "I believe in the communion of spirits as ministering angels." The later substitution of "and" rather than "as" is an important distinction. The way it was given to Emma Britten, it suggests that the so-called angels are in fact surviving spirits of individuals who have lived in the physical, like Helen and Barbara. Changing or correcting the word "and" suggests instead that there's another species of spirit called angel. But this subtle change alters Britten's revelation so as to be in closer agreement with the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition of angels and devils being a separate group of beings apart from us humans. This seemingly innocuous word change, however, illustrates how our hidden beliefs, which are still surviving from our childhood Christianity, remain with us all, pervading our underlying perspective until we root them out. While this change may have been accomplished simply so that the so-called Christian spiritualists wouldn't be offended by Emma Hardinge Britten's original statement, yet it did change the basic meaning, and it illustrates the problem which truth struggles against when our spiritualist principles are approved by a majority vote at some convention. The truths invariably get compromised. Warren Chase, one of the first apostles of modern spiritualism, who founded a spiritualist church in 1853 in Sturgis, Michigan, was pretty clear about this. He made it a point to keep spiritualism out of Christianity and Christianity out of spiritualism. Chase felt the dogma of Christianity was the only poison spiritualism was likely to take that could destroy its usefulness. He said, "Science cannot accept the heaven and hell concept as a place, nor accept devils and angels. So it's important for us spiritualists not to slip backwards into Christian doctrines. But as we examine this controversy, I have to say again, as I stated in earlier addresses, it's our duty as spiritualists to be sure of what we believe and to challenge our principles until we understand them. This is stated clearly by both the NSAC here in America and the SNU in the British Commonwealth. The NSA Spiritualist Manual states clearly, the Declaration of Principles adopted by the NSAC should be clearly read over, analyzed, criticized, and otherwise discussed until each one feels satisfied he thoroughly understands them. And after that, they may profitably be perfectly memorized. The SNU agrees with that and says these principles are not intended to be binding rules of dogma. Rather, they should provide a moral and ethical framework upon which people can base their way of living. Further, Hudson Tuttle, an early seer in American spiritualism, states that if spiritualists organize, it is because organization is the best method to reach desirable results and the means by which each receiving the combined strength of all. However, such organizations must be based on absolute personal freedom and unquestioned right to individual opinion and action to be as the rights of others remain, so far as the rights of others remain inviolable, there must be agreement to differ. So this is our motivation in providing this series on the spiritualist principles, to understand why we believe what we believe as spiritualists and to convince ourselves of it. Now, for simplicity of explanation, I will refer to this principle as the communion of spirits as ministering angels. using the wording originally given by Emma Hardinge Britten, rather than words approved by some committee at a later convention of the NSAC or the SNU. The SNU further defines this principle as communion with divine energy is a natural and essential part of existence. Communion between the spirit itself and its creations is an inbuilt ability. Spiritualists use this ability for communication directly or via a medium between those in the spirit world and ourselves. This is not supernatural. It is a normal activity. The main purpose of communication with the spirit world is to provide the evidence which supports our philosophy. The ministry of angels brings enhanced wisdom to enlighten the individual, society, and the world in which we live. This includes those who are dedicated to the welfare and service of mankind, bringing inspiration and guidance and healing. It's interesting again to note that this further definition provided by the SNU does not treat on who the angels actually are. So what it says does allow what Britten originally said, that angels are indeed the surviving consciousness of individuals, without ruling out that they could also be a separate species of consciousness, but does not decide either way. Hudson Tuttle, referred to earlier, states that all spiritual beings were eliminated from physical bodies, which infers that they were living individual humans. He goes on to say, they are frequent visitors, often near those they love, and they strive to warn, protect, and influence them. And as they departed, take deep interest in the affairs of earth. They mingle in all the reform of the day, the temperance movement, women's rights, the high duties and responsibilities of parentage, the abolition of all slavery, the thorough education of all, the establishment of universal peace, the promulgation of correct religious views in contradiction to prevailing errors, and all movements for the elevation and improvement of mankind claim their attention. So the angels are out there helping us all the time. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, as quoted from the NSAC Spiritualism Manual, said, one of the deepest and most imperative cravings of the human heart as it follows its beloved ones beyond the veil is for some assurance that they still love and care for us, that they have overcome, have arisen, and are crowned, glorified. But they still remain to us, our assistants, our comforters, and in every hour of darkness, their voices speak to us. And after reading all these and a myriad of other pioneers, I can easily conclude that what Emma Hardinge Britten said was entirely correct. Angels are not a separate group of servant beings, but are our departed loved ones. And so with her, I believe in the communion of spirits as ministering angels. Now, I hope this discussion of how changing one word, as, changed to and, in one of our principles can alter much of its meaning, and why both the NSAC and the SNU challenge us to carefully read over, analyze, criticize, and otherwise discuss these principles until each one of us feels satisfied that he thoroughly understands them. And why Hudson Tuttle said, there must be agreement to differ. Personally, I know that Helen, my departed mother-in-law, who incidentally died 5 years before I met and married her daughter, Gail, and so never met me in this physical life, is a ministering angel. Helen came to work with me on her own, not at my request, just showed up as a volunteer. So Emma Hardinge Britten was correct in how she originally said it was revealed to her. I believe in the communion of spirits as ministering angels. And no majority of mere mortals voting in an SNU convention 93 years later in 1964, to change that word, should alter that statement in any way. And that same is true of the NSAC principles, all of which were altered and re-altered at subsequent conventions with mortal delegates trying by majority vote to determine the truth and continually adding new principles. Unfortunately, this is how truth struggles, with being watered down to make it more palatable to the confused masses. And this is why when we research the origins of the principles, we often find that the earliest statements seem to be the truest, while the later statements tend to be the most politically correct and less controversial. Yes, Grandma may now have graduated to be an angel, or not. Thank you.